This episode is the thing about HubSpot as a B2B marketing platform. And so these podcast episodes are all about having conversations with B2B marketers about what truly matters to building scalable, sustainable, and substantial marketing growth. Today I'm joined by Timothy Roberts. He's a graduate of law and finance. He's built a career as a B2B growth marketer, leading complex website projects for larger organizations like Cordia, as well as heading up marketing and growth for startups, including Blurter and his own startup, Data Visioner. Welcome, Tim. How are you doing?
Great, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So I guess just to set the scene here a little bit, I know that you worked at one of the big four when you graduated. How did that experience inform you as far as your career in marketing? It's not the path that's most trodden for someone that goes into the big four to step out and step into the world of marketing.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's going back a few years now. But yes, my graduate role, I was at one of the big four accounting firms. And that was around 10 years ago, in the height of the global financial crisis. And I think one of the big things that I learned from working at a large performance-orientated or performance-driven organization, and it's probably accentuated at the big four accounting firms, is the importance of constantly learning. And also having the right processes in place as you do work to make sure you've got the right checks and balances. And I think it's not to say that you need to apply, say, that level of rigor with every company that you work for. And every company, I think, is on a continuum somewhere between compliance and innovation. As you move along that continuum, you need to adjust the formula that you're working with. So a phrase that's quite common in startup world is move fast and break things, which is the opposite of what you'd be doing at an accounting firm. But I think just thinking about the parameters by which you do that is really important. Another piece of advice that I had while I was there was to pick something to be really good at and double down on that. And I think at the time I thought tax pooling seemed pretty interesting, which it seems like a while ago now, but it was actually kind of an area that I find quite interesting. So I spent a bit of time learning more about that. But I think the underlying theme there is really around focus. And I think it's very easy to try and take on the whole world, but the reality is most successful people and most successful businesses really do double down on something that they're interested in, that they're good at. And I think sometimes we just need to, as we're running marketing campaigns, as we're rolling out different programs, we're thinking about how sales and marketing interact, we just really need to zoom out and think, what are we best at and how can we focus our attention on those things?
Right. Grand. I guess as we were talking before this, one of the conversations that there is in 10X is, how do you trade in time for impact? And I guess in the Big Four sense, or in any professional services firm, you're schooled in how to sell your time and recover your time, and that is the increment of measurement and performance. There is how much did you bill, and I guess there is a shift going on, and it's especially true in a startup environment. Like how much time you spend on something doesn't really apply as part of a startup. It is much more about what sort of impact you can have. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on that paradox, if you like.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge working in any professional services capacity, whether it's an accounting firm, marketing, any service offering, and how you package up the value in a way that both works around that challenge with time, but also in a way that the person buying the service or looking for the impact understands the impact that's actually been created. And I think the formula in a more traditional industry is very known, and the output is very known. Whereas in, say, a growth marketing role, or you're looking at revenue operations, or whatever the scenario is a lot of the stuff's new. and it hasn't necessarily been done before. And so a good output or a bad output, or the impact that creates, can often be assessed on different criteria. And I think that's one of the key things if we think about how we measure impact, is understanding what impact looks like for the person that you're doing the work for. Whether that you're coming at from an external perspective or you're working internally at a company.
Great. So I guess knowing each other for a number of years, I recall the first marketing automation platform that you cut your teeth on was Marketo. Tell us a little bit about how you came to settle on HubSpot as your platform of choice for marketers and subsequently for websites and service and sales.
Yeah, so once again going back a few years, but I think Marketo was probably one of the first marketing technology platforms I was exposed to outside of the typical ad platforms and Google Analytics and the more common platforms there. And I think the really important thing is finding a product that fits your organization best and identifying at the outset why you're looking for a tech solution and what outcomes you're expecting, and then work back based on the needs of each group of people involved in using it. And one of the things with Marketo is it's great in terms of providing a blank canvas to build upon, but there's a lot of cost around implementing, and you kind of need to do that before you can start using it. And if we take a look at in New Zealand, most businesses are either SMBs or mid-market. We don't have that many large enterprises who are making that kind of investment. And so that by default means that tools like Marketo aren't necessarily the right fit for most companies in New Zealand. And if we look at HubSpot by contrast, you can really start using that relatively quickly out of the box without too much training. Now, there's obviously a massive opportunity around implementation to really deliver the same results as a system like Marketo. But the thing is you can do that over time rather than having to sort of do it at the outset. And I think it's that component that really has the value for organizations in New Zealand who are, by world standards, relatively small, even our larger companies.
Yeah, as I think back on that, one of the things that was missing from Marketo, nearly a decade ago, was a CRM. And so the relationship with Salesforce was pretty pivotal for them at that stage. And one of the quirks of the New Zealand market is that there were a phenomenal number of homegrown CRMs. When I was looking around, again, 8 or so years ago. And I guess that's one of the things about HubSpot is this kind of philosophical underpinning of the flywheel and the idea of creating hubs, essentially, from which revenue could flow. So do you have any thoughts on that evolution, what you've seen with HubSpot over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. The first thing is when I first started working with HubSpot or Marketo, that technology was a new technology. And if you were introducing it, it was new to everyone, and there was quite a lot of work in terms of justifying what a business case would look like for it. Whereas nowadays, it's really a given that you need the system, and if you don't have it, you're falling behind your competition. So there's kind of a base understanding of what this thing is. Marketing automation is now like a CRM system. Everyone needs a CRM of some sort. And I think there's a lot more maturity in terms of understanding when you look at the CRM component, that having your own custom-built tool, while maybe you can do things a little bit differently than a solution that you buy out of the box, it also incurs a significant amount of ongoing cost and complexity, both in terms of maintaining it, onboarding people. And then when you start to integrate tools like marketing automation, you need a layer of sales tools around it. You need to think about, well, the CRM is really the hub of your organization. It's not just an acquisition tool. It's not just for marketing and sales. It's also for your service areas as well. And how you break that down will depend on your organization, but perhaps it's support, perhaps it's customer success. having a custom solution is just not going to work in a world where the ecosystem is so important.
Yeah, so thinking about the businesses you've encountered over the years, what are some of the top misconceptions or common mistakes that organizations make when they're implementing a platform like HubSpot from your perspective?
Well, I think a lot of the time it's looking to the technology and thinking, there's the solution, it's been handed to me on a plate and I just pay some money, I put the solution in and all is well and we'll get whatever the result is that we're hoping for. But my general observation, having worked with quite a range of companies now around CRM implementations, is that oftentimes a company will fill its vertical functions first. So have a strong sales team, strong marketing team, but they don't necessarily have the horizontals filled out, whether that's someone who's looking at growth across the organization, whether they're looking at revenue across the organization, or whether they're looking at something else. And so what that means is you still have this sort of siloed thought pattern. Marketing does this and sales does this. So like my general advice to people is that you zoom out and you think about acquisition and you think about how do you grow as you're acquiring customers. And then you think about, okay, well, what role does marketing play in that? What role does sales play in that? And the reason that's relevant to rolling out a product like HubSpot is because HubSpot doesn't represent just one part of the organization. It sits at the core of everything you're doing, as we touched upon earlier. And so that's not just acquisition. It's about how we activate new customers as they come on board. It's how we retain new customers. So we have to be really clear about who owns HubSpot in the organization. And if it sits within a vertical, it creates a perception that that's been driven from a marketing angle or a sales angle. And intrinsically, that's often what happens because naturally the person who's in that role is coming from that kind of background. Or alternatively, it's sort of put in a more of a neutral or administrative capacity, like someone responsible for the CRM, and then each area of the business will work within parameters that they set. So I guess the key thing really there, in my view, is don't turn to technology and think if I put in HubSpot, it's going to help me grow faster. There's a whole lot of other things that you need to be thinking about before you put the technology in that relate to understanding your market, your go-to-market strategy, what are the core skill sets that each person in your team has. Every company is different, and really just understanding where you are now, where you want to get to, and what part HubSpot plays in that, and not think of that as a complete solution.
Right. And can you give us an example of where you've encountered this sort of thinking that's ended up tripping up an implementation?
Yeah. So in terms of tripping up an implementation, I would say a lot of the time HubSpot might come into the organization either via a sales or a marketing-driven objective. And that objective is based on a KPI that needs to be filled. And hopefully that KPI is tied to a larger objective around growth and aligns with everything. But
it could equally have been like some siloed objective. So
correct. So there could be an objective that's really important to sales or really important to marketing or really important to customer success that doesn't necessarily contribute to that broader view of growing the company. And so a lot of time and money can be spent to surface certain information that is actually relatively irrelevant in the broader scheme of things. And it's very difficult often when you're operating within your vertical to be able to navigate that if someone's not responsible for, say, growth across the stack. So another example, an example of that would really be, if we looked at website traffic, for example, right? The amount of traffic to your website is relatively meaningless if you can't use that to forecast how much you're going to grow in the future and when that growth is likely to occur. And I'm not saying that every company I've worked with can do that. That's a question about maturity of the organization and time to implementation, and where they are in their growth cycle. But it's really about connecting those metrics, because the sales metrics sit in sales, the website metrics might sit within marketing, but we need to bridge that gap, and we need to be thinking about who in the organization is best able to do that.
Yeah, and I suppose some of it comes back to the difference between B2C and B2B, and the fact that B2B is much more relationship oriented and less transaction oriented. Your point about website traffic in a B2B context, it's not theoretically statistically significant, but it is an indicator of the quality of the relationships that you have there. If you're getting traffic, it means that something's going on at a relational level. It might not be a very meaningful indicator, but you kind of have to see it in the context of what it is relative to the type of business that you're trying to do. And I guess the converse is true typically in a B2C environment, where the amount of traffic that you're getting to your website is actually a leading indicator of how much you're going to sell ultimately. So I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on that concept.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't profess to be a B2C expert, but definitely in the B2B context, I think that it depends a lot on the organization. So if we're thinking about selling software and the person can make a purchase of that software online and sign up for a free trial, the mindset around website traffic is going to be very different than if it was, what we say, an accounting firm or a law firm. People going to the website to verify offline conversations and see, is this person the person that they've been told about, and learn a bit more about them. Then you shouldn't have the expectation that a spike in that website traffic is necessarily going to lead to a conversion online, because it's probably just hooking into an offline conversation or some other acquisition element. And that kind of goes back to understanding what your go-to-market strategy is and having everyone on the same page. Because the worst thing is to roll out a new website or to implement marketing automation on the presumption that that's somehow going to deliver a result that actually doesn't fit with how you actually acquire new customers. So I think that's definitely something that that's relevant to that. Is it really depends on the business model and how your customers buy.
Okay. And I guess the next question that I had to talk about was, in the context of B2B versus B2C, where do you really see the power of a system like HubSpot?
Yeah, well, I think the key thing everyone wants to achieve is the ability to acquire customers at a lower cost. And get better customers who are going to be a better match for your services. They're going to give you a higher NPS score and make more recommendations to more people. And the HubSpot's concept of a flywheel, which gets talked about a lot, where you've got an input into a system and you're spinning it faster and faster and faster to generate growth. That it's fundamentally important to that as a core technology that you need to be able to spin the flywheel faster. Because I guess in a perfect world, if we could all be growing at a constant rate if you're a traditional business, or exponentially if you're a startup, based on only organic growth and referrals, that would be a wonderful world to be in, because you wouldn't have any marketing or sales costs. But the reality is that that's not a possibility. So the question is what element do marketing, sales, and other areas of the organization play in spinning the flywheel faster, so that you can generate a higher proportion of referrals out of that. And if you're sort of looking at if you're looking at a company that's sales-led, it's going to be slightly different to product-led, or I sometimes refer to it as scale-led, because the mindset around what you're trying to achieve is different, and the way you achieve it is different as well. Another factor as well, that's come up a lot on social media lately, and it's an occurrence that I've previously identified but hadn't really given it a label, is this concept of dark social. And dark social is where you've got activity that's happening either online or offline, social interactions that are happening perhaps in Slack or in Teams or in places that we can't measure it. and really thinking about what that means in terms of spinning your flywheel and in terms of what metrics you're collecting within your marketing automation system. Because if you can't measure it, then what often happens is people focus more on the things that they can measure. But I can think of a number of different startups where one of the key growth drivers is an asset that was published by another company in the ecosystem that drives a huge amount of really good traffic, but you can't measure that. And it took a long time to work out what that asset was because they don't necessarily tell you that you've been put into a PDF. And so I think that's really important as well, is thinking about how does a marketing automation system like HubSpot measure things, but which metrics should I be tracking? Because we need to factor in all of the stuff you can't measure as well.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of an example from our collective past. Coming back to Marketo, I recall there was a webinar that we did on Marketo, and there was a infographic on the power of video that was published as a blog post on the Marketo blog. And for ages, we couldn't work out what these spikes in traffic to the Amplify website were. So it's a really relevant point. But I guess what that also says to me is that when you're considering using a system like HubSpot or a platform like HubSpot, it's not about any one function that it performs, and it's not just about CRM, for instance. It's actually about the ecosystem that surrounds it, and this idea of people buying product ecosystems rather than products. And I know when we were chatting recently, you were saying that, a lot of the time that gets spent these days is actually looking at various integrations and how they're ultimately going to benefit any given function that you're trying to perform. So I'm just curious, Tim, your thoughts on this idea of product ecosystems and what they drive.
Yeah, so I think if we cast our minds back maybe to the 80s or maybe the 90s, because I don't have a huge amount of recollection of the 80s, but companies will be putting in ERP systems and systems like that where the expectation was this is a system that could do everything that the organization needed to do. The problem is exactly what we talked about at the very beginning, is if you don't have focus, then you do everything kind of averagely instead of doing something really, really well. And I think this is the concept around ecosystems that's really working well for organizations for two reasons. One is because if you buy a system that does everything, it can't do everything really well. But the other thing is that the innovation around business models and how we sell and what we need to do is moving really fast as well. And so you can't really have say a product like HubSpot innovation on every single front at the same time. So if you want to send out quotes, for example, they have a built-in tool, and that built-in tool will serve your basic requirements. If you a sales-led organization, maybe something like PandaDoc is really good in terms of sending out quotes, because you can send through a contract, you can send through more detail, it hooks into HubSpot, you can add the products in, and it integrates seamlessly. If you're a product-led organization, it kind of needs to hook into your app as well. So you might be looking at a product like Deal Seal or something like that, where you say, okay, well, the product that's great for B2B sales-led sales isn't actually great for acquiring customers in a product-led approach, because we need to be able to churn things out faster because our deal values are lower. And that's just one example with a quotation tool. You think about accounting, you think about other marketing tools you need. All that stuff needs to integrate, and it needs to integrate seamlessly. And your CRM or HubSpot, as we've sort of been talking about in this podcast, is really the hub of that. And the more that you can feed in, the better, really, because you can actually leverage that data across all of your tools.
What's kind of interesting from what you're saying there is, to me anyway, is this idea of actually needing business analyst skills to help evaluate the requirements and enable the best choices to be made in terms of integrations. So there's kind of a broader skill set, if you like, that needs to be brought to bear that matches that horizontal that you were talking about at the beginning in terms of looking at how it impacts the whole of organization rather than just any one given silo. So having worked with you as, in fact, a business analyst in terms of the implementation of HubSpot, I'm just curious for you to connect the dots, if you like, on that concept.
Yes, so I would probably add another layer into that as well and say you need some user experience design knowledge as well. Because if you start with just the business analysis part, you end up thinking about what the business needs and not the experience that you're creating for the buyer or your customer as well. So I think that's really important when you're rolling out a CRM system or a website or whatever it is that you're building. And I think it goes back once again to what we were talking about earlier, where you have, like within marketing, for example, you already have a huge range of different skill sets. And some people are strong at some things, some people are not as strong at other things, some people just can't do certain things. If you're trying to build a website and you come from a background in brand, you're probably not a front end coder, and the front end coder may not be familiar with running a user experience workshop, for example, discovery kind of workshop. So you already have a huge amount of skills in that marketing team anyway. And now we're saying, okay, well, if say marketing was responsible for rolling out HubSpot, we also need business analysis skills. We need to understand the horizontal. And I think that's where you often kind of see that breakdown. So having someone that's across things that impact all areas of the business is really fundamentally important.
And I guess that is a good segue into the next question that I had for us to talk about, which was, internal alignment is crucial. Talk us through how misalignment impacts getting a good result using a system like HubSpot.
Yeah, well, I think it's about having all of the stakeholders in the room at the very beginning and being, as we see, clear about who ultimately owns not just the project, but who ultimately owns the outcome that the project's delivering over a longer term period of time. Because otherwise we become very short-term focused. There's a budget or a time or an allocation of resource that needs to achieve a certain goal, but we could achieve that goal and not set ourselves up for what we need in 6 months' time or a year's time. But keeping in mind, obviously, that as we talked about, business models are constantly changing. You don't know what's going to happen next year. So that's where thinking about the process that you go through and having a system that isn't, for example, a completely customized system or a system specifically designed, say, is made really, really good for sales, but doesn't really work for anyone else, or really, really good for marketing, doesn't work for success or support. So having alignment with all stakeholders around what we're trying to achieve, have a system that has a supporting ecosystem. So maybe you start with the built-in stuff and you can add to that over time, where you can swap out different tools. And so you can really adapt as you go. I think if you don't have alignment, then you have no way of judging success at the end of not just the project, but at the end of the financial year or the following financial year either. So what the CEO sees as a successful rollout of HubSpot might be completely different to someone in sales or marketing or someone holding a growth or a revenue role. So that's why I kind of, as we touched on, prefer to think about the different elements of, say, your customer engine, where you're talking about acquisition, you're talking about adoption of the product. You're really thinking about what's the journey the customer's going on, what do we need to do to functionally deliver on that, pulling that together, make sure everyone's got alignment around what the outcome is that's expected, everyone understands why it is that we're doing the thing we're doing, and then move forward. Don't sort of launch into the project because someone said it was urgent, and then try and work that out on the way through.
You talked earlier about scale-driven organizations. Tell me a little bit more about that. And I guess the reason why I'm asking is because clearly if you're a scale-driven organization, that really creates a framework for potential alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast is literally talking about that 10x kind of scenario or 100x over time. So, the mindset of both the organization as a whole and the individual people within a scale-led organization is very different than, say, a traditional business. They're humming along at a certain pace. They're happy with, say, 10% per year annual growth, or status quo, and so the mindset isn't so much around growth. It's around making sure that the model keeps working, and if the competitor starts doing something, to make sure you're one step ahead of them. But you're not thinking, how do I go from $1 million turnover to 100 million, from 100 million to 200 million? A lot of the best usage of these systems is in what I refer to as scale-led businesses, where you're looking for scale from day one. Product-led or marketing-led are sort of related concepts in there. But it's really, how do you do one-to-many really, really well, and make sure that you can maintain some level of a relationship with the people that are interacting with your brand, despite the fact that you're doing one-to-many. But you can't scale sales-led with very close, personal relationships with each of those people at a rapid pace that you need to if you're a high growth.
Yeah, I suppose coming back to that connection that you were making with 10x, is that a system or an approach like the flywheel and the HubSpot system enables you to actually leapfrog ahead. So, these small incremental changes that you're able to implement across different departments actually enables a 10x return holistically. So much of the measurement of success comes down to the perspective that you're taking in the first instance. So if you see small incremental or cumulative things as being an outcome that you're looking for in order to achieve some sort of 10x as a result, then this is an approach, a system, a method, a framework, or a system, as I refer to it, or platform, I guess, that can deliver that sort of 10x return.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're completely right. There's different points of conversion along the journey that you're taking people through as they go from someone that's just become aware of your brand to sort of generating demand, so they want to buy your product, to ultimately making a sale to them. And so, if someone comes along and says, well, we need to double sales by the end of the year, doubling sales, that sounds like a lot, right? You need to be selling twice as much as you are today.
Yeah, I guess that makes me think of the classic dilemma in marketing that, all sales wants more leads or a greater volume of leads, where if marketing does that job and produces a large number of leads, the complaint then becomes, well, we need better quality leads. And how do you strike that balance effectively between quality, quantity, and actually velocity is the third variable in there. You've got to have a credible presence in the market to be able to enable something to go from lead to close as well. So there's very much a balancing act across those three things, volume, velocity, and veracity in terms of quality of leads. And that's something that I've encountered is like the number one pain point for marketers trying to deliver that balanced portfolio effectively to the rest of the business. And if you don't have a perspective that sees it from all of those three dimensions, you end up with a situation where the marketing department can come across as being irrelevant because it's not producing enough of the right sort of leads.
Yeah, I think that comes back to aligning expectations again of what is the purpose of marketing. Is it to generate leads or is it to generate demand? And what are the timelines on that? Because And what budgets do you need? Because if you have a very limited budget and someone wants results within 6 to 12 months, then the best you really can do is go out there, run some campaigns and try and get some leads, because you can't generate demand within your category and become the dominant player over that period of time. But I think if you look over the long term, like if you think about if you want a tool that helps to improve your grammar in emails, you don't go onto Google and look for a tool. You just go to Grammarly.com, because you know that that's the dominant player in this industry, and you're not going to spend more time when it's a relatively simple buying decision. And I think marketing has a really important role to play in generating that level of demand and pushing you to be the dominant player. But it's not necessarily measurable on a monthly basis. And you need results in the meantime. You can't sort of sit there and say, okay, well, we'll be the dominant player in three years, but we can't deliver you any leads until then. So it's kind of really understanding, I think, where you're at on that cycle, and how the technology fits into that. If you think about, outbound prospecting, you can get some results. And it works really well in those early days where you just need something right away. And if you think about, but it doesn't scale. And then you think about what's the next step in that. Okay, we run some campaigns and we get a whole bunch of contacts, but not all of those are leads. Any one time, maybe 3% of the people that that you're talking to are actually interested or looking to solve the problem, actively seeking a solution, and interested in buying from your company. And so part of the challenge is working out which of those 3% are actually those people, and that's where marketing automation systems like HubSpot can help you over the short to medium term, while you're doing the other piece alongside around creating that inbound demand, where people are sort of showing up to your website. They're either signing up or they're requesting a call or whatever it is that's relevant to the type of company you're at.
Yeah, I guess how I would sum that up is, internal alignment is dependent on organizational maturity. That's understanding where you are in some sort of maturity curve is pretty key to understanding the probability of success. And
it comes back to, if we once again look at tech companies as an example, it comes back to where you are in terms of product market fit. If you have terrible product market fit, you're going to be throwing a lot of money at getting your initial customers, and that may be okay. That may be fine. That may be the objective, and as long as everyone's aligned, that's the case. But if someone thinks that you're further along in terms of maturity, and they think, you should be generating leads at a value that represents, hitting the late majority rather than early adopters, then you're going to have a misalignment in terms of understanding. And some person's going to say, well, that's really good value for money, while someone else is sitting there going, that's terrible value for money. Why is this happening? So you're totally right. The maturity of the company, but also the individuals within it in terms of their understanding of the role of marketing and sales and how they should interact is really important as well.
And so just to sum things up, what would be your top tips for a head of marketing or a marketing leader when it comes to building a business case for the introduction of a sales, marketing, and service system?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question, Sam, around, putting together a business case is obviously a really important aspect when you're investing in a large-scale technology solution, especially when it impacts so many different areas of the company and so many stakeholders. So the worst thing you could do is sort of just launch into it, buy the product, and start using it. You really want to make sure that everyone's clear on how it aligns with the company's overall strategy, where it's going over the long term, how it fits with the go-to-market strategy, like how do your buyers buy, and is this technology solution going to support the acquisition of more of those buyers? And also thinking about the shorter-term things. So a framework that's quite often used, it originally came from Google, but it's very commonly used in technology companies, is the OKR framework. And that's where you set objectives for each period of time. It's often a quarter, and then key results that are used as a reference point for whether you're achieving that objective or not. So if you kind of look ahead and you say, okay, well, for this quarter, we're trying to achieve this, but for next, we think we need to achieve these things. It may be that you don't have the tools that you need to achieve that. So I think it's the long term, the short term, but really understanding how ultimately it results in how you actually grow the business. And one last thing on that actually is do some do a trial. Work with the whoever's providing the software, if it's HubSpot, on some sort of a pilot. Work with each team. Work with getting the solution in place before you roll it out to everyone, because that's another challenge. Is sometimes something seems easy on the surface. Oh, I've used this plugin before. Let's just throw it in, and it'll all work nicely. But then it turns out the business requirements and the way that customers interact is slightly different in this business to a different business. And actually, the thing that is actually a great product isn't fit for purpose in this scenario. So it's really just testing the waters and making sure that you've got a good implementation plan to go with your business case.
Yeah, I guess that puts me in mind of using something of an agile or product market fit approach, or lean marketing approach to things. And I've heard of examples of things like growth-driven design as a way to test those concepts. Can you maybe talk a little bit about
absolutely. So I completely agree with you. Having some sort of an agile framework is really, really important, because the reality is you can't build or create or implement everything that everyone wants right away. There has to be some prioritization as you go through that process. But you also don't want to lose or not capture the different needs, because you're going to have a sort of an iterative process. So growth-driven design is an agile framework for building websites and very similar to setting up a marketing automation system where you want to start with a launch pad of some sort that meets the base requirements that you need to get the thing running. You launch your website as a launch pad, a base layer that covers off the basic needs of the organization and talks to the needs of buyers as they interact with your organization. And then you layer on top of that over time. So maybe you're not recruiting right away, and you're not looking to grow the number of team members within your organization, but 6 months down the track you are. So don't try and take on rebuilding the careers page as part of the initial launch of the website. Do it in 3 or 4 months, where you can give that, once again, dedicated focus and do a really, really good job of building that section of the site so that you recruit the best employees that you possibly can, rather than slapping it together because someone had a tick box that said you need a careers section on the website. But you need a formula, you need a framework and a process by which you capture all those requirements up front, because they are really, really important. It's just working out on the timeline where it fits in best so you can deliver the best output. And you can apply that kind of framework or that kind of thinking to websites, marketing automation, really any kind of service or product that you're rolling out.
Well, I guess that gives us an opportunity for a future episode where we can unpack concepts like growth-driven design, for instance. So, Tim, great to have you here. Thanks for your insights and your thoughts here.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Sam. It's been great to be here, and I think the key thing really from everything we've discussed is you don't know what the next headwind is going to be for your business. So it always pays to have the right systems in place so that you're ready to take on whatever challenge appears.